Welcome a croeso. My name is Karen Diamond and I'm Artistic Director of Relive, an arts and health and wellbeing charity based in Wales. We co-create life story theatre performances and arts projects alongside older people, military veterans and families, people living with dementia and people at the end of life. Our work explores themes of isolation, loneliness, aging, dementia, complex trauma, including PTSD and moral injury, and death and dying. I'd like to welcome you to this video exploring how we as art and health practitioners look after ourselves before, during and after projects. And with me today, I'm delighted to be joined by Alison O'Connor, co-founder of Relive, but also Alison works as a therapist and clinical supervisor. So welcome, Alison.
Yeah, delighted to be here with you and to have a chance to talk about this really important topic.
Before we start, just wanted to say that you carried out a research study for the Journal of Applied Arts and Health called The Work Hurts, which explores the emotional impact on arts practitioners working in health, social care and participatory settings, and how supervision or the lack of supervision affects artists' well-being. And I wondered if we could start by asking you why you called your study The Work Hurts.
So 5 years ago, we together were at a conference, the Culture, Health and Wellbeing Conference in Bristol. We were presenting some of Relive's work there. So actually our focus was on the work and the impact on participants and the creativity, the artistic outcomes. But during that conference, I had a conversation with a friend and former colleague, someone who'd been working in the field of arts and health for 20, 30 years. And in that conversation, they shared with me that they were thinking of stepping back from their arts practice, sort of working directly with vulnerable people. I was so shocked to hear this. I imagined this was someone who would be doing that direct work until their 70s. And through that conversation, when I asked them, why, what's going on, they said, I've realized the more I do this, that the work hurts. And for me, that was a really powerful, and actually, it was a kind of a bit of a jolt for me, I think, looking back, because it really resonated for me. If really experienced, really skilled practitioners, like the person I was talking to, are reaching that point of going, I need to step back because this is hurting me now. There's something that's missing. There's something that's needed.
For us, I'd like us to reflect back, if it's okay. I'd like us to go back a little bit to when we were working side by side as co-facilitators, theatre practitioners, working on a project called A Story to Call My Own. And I remember very clearly one woman in a rehearsal sharing her experiences of domestic violence with us and the other two members of that company. And it really resonated with me, her story. It sort of triggered something within me as a personally, not just as a professional. And I remember clearly, this is before the time of supervision. This is before the time of reflective practice. I remember going home. I couldn't stop thinking about her. I was anxious. I was worried. I didn't sleep all night. In fact, I had intrusive thoughts, wondering how she's doing, wondering how the impact of sharing those experiences had on her. And I remember we had a rehearsal the next morning back in Chapter Art Centre, and I was waiting nervously at the door, wondering how she was going to be, wondering if she was going to turn up at all. And then I could see her walking up to the art centre, and she looked bright and light. And I said, hi, morning. And quite nervous, he said, how are you? Are you okay? And she turned to me and she said, Karen, I have had the best night's sleep I have had in years. And I just stood there, drained and confused.
What I'm really struck by is that real openness that you had. And when I think back to our time, of the early days of Relive, and hopefully other artists listening to this will connect with this, I think that is how we met participants, with this open invitation. We're here, we'd love to work with you creatively. Please share your stories. And I think while, of course, even back right at the beginning, we had an awareness of, boundaries to a degree, looking after people. Yeah. I think what we didn't have at that stage was that understanding or that awareness of how much that being really open potentially made us vulnerable to, as that story there of yours, I think, describes, to being really like deeply impacted by the work. When you said about the detail resonated personally for you, I think that definitely echoes the findings from my research study, where other artists describe some of the most challenging moments were when there was a crossover between their personal experiences and what they're working with professionally. And that maybe that's like one of the arguments for a need for a supportive, reflective space, is to be able to kind of separate that out in a way.
I think that started for us when we were working on a life story project with a group of people who wanted to explore their experience of death and dying, which was connected to the Marie Curie Hospice in Penarth. It was a deeply emotional project. It was also at times a very celebratory, beautiful, joyous project. But the urgency with which some of the group wanted to share some of the unresolved stories with us, that level of detail and intensity really weighed on us. And I remember you saying to me, I think we need to get some supervision. Supervision. What is that? Does that mean we are going to be assessed by a supervisor? Are we going to be assessed for getting the work right or wrong? I do remember feeling like, are we going to be in trouble if we get supervision?
I think that's so important that you've named that, because I think there is something, isn't there, in that phrase, supervision, that perhaps suggests a kind of monitoring or, as you said, assessment or getting it right. Yeah. And I guess looking back in terms of the timing there, I think at that point, like, started to train as a therapist and as a counsellor. And, of course, part of that training and part of the ongoing professional requirements of that profession is monthly supervision. What that gave me and then us was an understanding that supervision was if anything, a preventative, supportive, a reflective space to kind of really just check in with somebody else and go, how am I doing? How am I in relation to my work? Once we started that together at Relive, I don't know if you would agree, but for me, then so much kind of opened up and deepened, like in the work we were doing, as well as in our own sort of well-being and looking after ourselves.
It was almost a relief to be able to share with another person who was holding the space for us as practitioners. So suddenly, you're in a space where somebody's asking, how are you? How are you two as a unit, as co-workers? And realizing that my experience of a rehearsal session could be very different to your experience of a rehearsal. At times, for some of us, the bonds that are developed, the trust, the intimacy, the tenderness, it sometimes can be hard to maintain the boundary, to maintain the professional relationship, and to maintain a sense of ourselves sometimes. So I wonder, how do we find ways to replenish the self?
The longer I do this work, the older I get, the more I think I'm appreciating how actually developing and holding really good boundaries is an act of self-care. Whereas perhaps the kind of younger me, when we first started doing this work, almost thought, just give as much as you can, constantly be there for projects, participants.
The knock-on effect for that can be burnout. It can be compassion fatigue.
Yeah.
It can be that we've taken an eye off our own needs and our own well-being needs.
I think for me, what I've really kind of deeply learned is that boundary of really knowing myself, I think, and of knowing when it's time to take a break, knowing when it's time to say no to a project. That's been and still a work in progress for me, but I think that's an act of self-care that's been helpful for me to go, sometimes it's okay to say we can't do everything, and to be able to put our own needs, or maybe the need for balance first.
With Relive now, since 2011, we have a supervisor on every project. It is also part of every budget.
Yeah.
And supervision is open not only to arts practitioners, but to volunteers within our organization, to coordinators within our organization. But what are some of the self-care strategies that you may be just wondering, boundaries being one, but is there other things might we consider as strategies to support our own well-being?
For me, definitely making sure that I have enough exercise, nature, really kind of stuff that's away from a screen, that's away from anything kind of work related. I know that's key to me. So what I've started doing this year, which I kind of, I've thought about for a while, but with my diary, which I've got here, is actually putting in week by week, putting in my yoga, exercise, swim before I put my work things in my diary. So that's just a little practical step that I'm doing to try and, I guess, ensure that balance is there, that, I need, for me to be well enough to do my work well, this is what I need. For me, another really vital thing is connection with others. I, am privileged to share this deep connection with you, and that through our friendship and our careers together, that we have, I think, always kind of treasured that and actually found great energy and support from being able to debrief, reflect, laugh together. And also, I know that we both have those networks away from each other and our direct work together, and, acknowledging that need to be supported, to connect with others is important for me.
It can be all consuming sometimes.
Absolutely.
So some switch off can also be important, as well as the physical stuff, the emotional, and for some people amongst us, the spiritual as well. Yeah. It's looking at those experiences that just help almost give us opportunities to switch off, and we absolutely need them.
Definitely, 100%.
Thank you, Alison, for joining me today.
Thanks so much, Karen.